Hi, class. I'm out today, as you know. Um, I'm in the process of recording this lesson for you for today, which is going to pick up where we left off on the Constitutional Convention. So a couple reminders for this week. I'll be out again tomorrow and most likely Wednesday, but just look for alerts on Google Classroom regarding Wednesday, but I definitely know I'm going to be out tomorrow as well, and you will meet in the library again tomorrow. I am also going to have your vocab quizzes ready for you for Friday. We'll have a vocab quiz on Chapter 6 in class on Friday. And you have an inquisitive assignment for Chapter 6, which is due Friday as well. So we're going to start new material next week, Chapter 7. If you could have Chapter 7 read for Monday's class period, the 23rd. Monday's class period, the 23rd, Chapter 7. So we're going to pick up today with ratification of the U.S. Constitution. We talked last week, and we ended last week talking about some of the major themes of the Constitution, federalism, and checks and balances, and the sharing of power between national and state governments. Today we're going to key in on ratification of the Constitution and the process by which the Constitution will be approved by the states. It had to have been approved by 9 of the 13 states after the Constitutional Convention. The process is basically going to begin as soon as the convention ends, with the delegates from the Constitution at Philadelphia going back to their respective 13 states and basically pitching the Constitution to the state legislatures to kind of gather support for the document. And in some places, ratification will be easier than others. In some cases, ratification will be almost unanimous in a number of states. And in other states, there's going to be some pretty close votes and some pretty contentious debate on the issue of ratification. Let's open class with a short author video from your packet. Now, you'll be looking where I'm drawing the information from this PowerPoint. This is a PowerPoint that I've shared with you, our Google slideshow rather, that I've shared with you already. This is Packet 3, ratification of the U.S. I shared this with you last week, I think on the 19th, and I reshared it again today. So if you need to view it after the video, it's the packet on ratification. Let's open with an author's video on this topic. And I might need to log in here. Yep, I do. And just give me a second. We'll do that, and we'll see what our author has to say about the Constitutional Convention and the ratification process that will occur after September 16th of 1787.
Although today Americans revere the U.S. Constitution, it almost failed to win support of the American people. After the Constitution was drafted in 1787 in Philadelphia, it was sent to the states for them to ratify. That process generated an almost violent debate over whether the Constitution was a good or bad thing for the new nation. In particular, Anti-Federalists, as they were called, opposed ratification of the Constitution because they feared that it created a government that was too powerful, a national government that would eventually usurp individual rights and civil liberties. In addition, Anti-Federalists were concerned that the new Constitution gave the presidency too much power vis-a-vis Congress. Primarily, people opposed the Constitution because it did not specify the actual civil rights and civil liberties that every American, every individual would enjoy. That lapse eventually led to the creation of the Bill of Rights. That is, the first 10 amendments to the new Constitution were designed to resolve some of the issues that had emerged during the debate over ratification?
So ratification of the Constitution, as we said, begins after the Constitutional Convention ends in September of 1787. The states, the delegates will go back to the states, and they will begin to push among each of the states. They'll push among state legislatures the reasons why each state should support the Constitution, and there will be vigorous debate, as the author pointed out. Just a quick recap, the Constitution was drafted in 1787. It aimed to replace the Articles of Confederation, and it establishes the framework for our federal government. This is kind of recap from last week. The convention, again, held in 1787. 12 of the 13 states attended, and there were dozens of key figures there, but the most prominent key figures included Ben Franklin, George Washington, who was president of the convention, and James Madison, who's earned the nickname Father of the Constitution for his contributions at the convention and beyond. We talked last week again about the key debates and the compromises. We talked about the Great Compromise, which resulted in a two-house legislature and a Senate, two-house legislature with the Senate and the House of Representatives. The Three-Fifths Compromise was also a key component of the convention, with slaves counting essentially as 3/5 of a person for representation purposes. For every 5,000 state slaves that lived in a state, for representation purposes, for apportionment purposes in the House of Representatives, only 3,000 of a state's 5,000 slaves would be counted. Also, there were compromises and debates over commerce and the slave trade compromise. And again, this limited Congress's power over trade. Commerce and slave trade compromise occurred at the convention as well. Let's take a look now at the ratification requirement. James Madison, we said, father of the Constitution. Final draft was completed September 17th of 1787, and it required ratification by 2/3 of the states in order to become effective. The number here says 9. 2/3 of 9 at the time would have, 2/3 of 13 at the time would have been 9. So essentially, when 9 states have approved the Constitution, it will become the law of the land. When 9 state legislatures have voted to approve, the Constitution will become the law of the land. Important to point out, though, that eventually all 13 states will ratify, even though 9 are required, only 9 are required. All 13 states will eventually ratify. It will be a kind of a long trip, a long road. The first state will ratify in 1788, and the 9th state will ratify. The 9th state will be New Hampshire, and we'll see in a chart moving forward when they actually ratify to become the 9th state to put the Constitution over the top, so to speak, and make it the law of the land. What's going to happen after the Constitutional Convention, and we talked a little bit about this in class, we are going to see after the Constitutional Convention the emergence of groups and supporters of ideas and beliefs that essentially are going to become America's first 2 political parties. We mentioned earlier in the year that Washington was not a huge supporter. President Washington was not a huge supporter of political parties. He understood why they existed. He understood they served some purposes, but he was not a huge supporter because he felt that political parties would divide rather than unite the young and the emerging nation. But those 2 political parties are going to arrive out of the Federalist and the Anti-Federalists, who are essentially going to be the Federalists will be the political party that will support the Constitution as it was written. So the Federalists are going to be those people after the convention who are very, very supportive of ratifying the Constitution as it was written in Philadelphia. The opponent to that group that's going to emerge are going to be the anti-Federalists. These are going to be people who don't feel that the Constitution is the correct way to govern the country, who don't feel that providing power to a national government or too much power to a national government is the way or the route to go. So these two groups are going to kind of emerge as rivals and enemies following the Constitutional Convention. The Federalists, again, supporters of the Constitution and supporters of ratifying it, and the Anti-Federalists who are going to emerge as the group that are looking to oppose the Constitution. Let's take a peek at our author's video on this topic.
During the 1790s, the United States developed its first political parties, organized political parties. One reason that was important is that prior to that, many Americans, including George Washington, did not want to have political parties. In the 18th century, they were referred to as factions, and it was assumed that factions or parties would be dangerous to liberty. That is, they would be pursuing their narrow political interest at the expense of the welfare of all of the people. Nevertheless, political parties did emerge in the 1790s, in particular the Federalists, as they were called, and the Republicans, not to be confused with the modern Republican Party. The original Republican Party was very different. The Federalists, led by George Washington and Alexander Hamilton and John Adams, they wanted to have a powerful national government, in part because they wanted to model the American economy after the British economy, the British Empire, and to be a great, powerful international nation. The Republican Party, led by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison of Virginia, wanted the opposite. They were very determined to protect states' rights, that is, the freedom and the independence and the rights and privileges of state governments vis-a-vis the national government. So the Federalists promoted a national bank, a national tariff, Alexander Hamilton's economic policies designed to create a powerful national economy and a powerful national government, whereas Jefferson, Madison, and the Republicans tried to preserve states' rights and an agricultural economy rather than a financial, business, and commercial economy as promoted by the Federalists. Those two parties became the basis for American political life, not just in the 1790s, but in the early 19th century as well.
So a quick recap from our author on the emergence of the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. Some important points to learn here. The Federalists are going to be the authors of a series of 85 essays, which promote the Constitution. And those essays are going to be collectively known as the Federalist Papers. 85 essays written by James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay under the pseudonym Publius. All right, these address the concerns of Anti-Federalists. These writings were designed to, again, elicit support for supporting the Constitution in the 13 states, although most of the Federalist Papers, most of the printing and the publishing of them are going to be focused on New York State newspapers. They're going to serve as the kind of model for why each of the 13 states should support the Constitution. And they basically laid out arguments. These three attendees of the Constitutional Convention are going to lay out the the reasons, in their view, that states and state legislatures should support the document. Now, anti-federalists oppose the new Constitution, fearing it would provide too much power to a central government. Key Federalists that we're looking at here again were Hamilton, John Jay, and James Madison, and some of the key anti-federalists that we're looking at are going to be some Virginia, not a surprise here, are going to be some Virginia delegates, and those are going to be led by, just go back one slide here, those are going to be led by Patrick Henry, George Mason, among others. So there you've got a little bit of information on the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. Again, Federalists, supporters of the Constitution as it was written, and proponents of getting it ratified. Anti-Federalists are going to be the people who are against the Constitution. And as your book pointed out in the reading, the Federalists had the advantage here in hoping to get their document, hoping to get the Constitution approved. The Federalists had the convention and the time to put together the document. The Anti-Federalist opposition is not very, very well organized. Their opposition largely is just being opposed to the Constitution. They don't have a bunch of reasons, and they don't have things spelled out as to why exactly they're opposed to it, other than the fact that they fear and don't want a federal government to have too much power. But the Federalists, due to that, because of they had the time to organize a document and create a document and basically 85 essays to refute and to debate, to squelch any reluctance to support it. You could say that the Federalists were better prepared in supporting the Constitution than the Anti-Federalists were in their opposition to it. Important point there to note. So the Federalists had the advantage here in getting their Constitution ratified. Let's look at the next slide and talk about state ratifying conventions. Each state, okay, again, we're talking after the Constitutional Convention ends. Each state will hold a ratifying convention to debate and vote on the Constitution. And to give you a comparison here, Delaware was the first state to ratify the Constitution, and that will occur just a few months after the Constitutional Convention ended. Delaware will ratify in early December of 1787, and 6 months later, in June of 1788, New Hampshire will become the 9th state to ratify, and New Hampshire will be the state, as I mentioned earlier in the slideshow, that will kind of put the Constitution over the top in terms of the number of votes that we'll need to become the law of the land. With New Hampshire ratifying, the Constitution will become the law of the land in the United States, and it will establish the government that we, to this very day, the blueprint and the foundation of our government that was established in 1788 stands still today. Another irony here, another important point, Delaware, because of the fact they were the first state to ratify, if you've ever seen a Delaware license plate, the motto on a Delaware license plate is the first state, and that refers to Delaware being the first state to approve of the Constitution. Another point on New Hampshire, legally, when New Hampshire ratifies in June of 1788, legally, the Constitution is the law of the land, but that does not stop the ratification process for the remaining 4 states. All of the 4 remaining states will eventually vote to ratify, some in close votes, but just because 9 have ratified and the Constitution has become law, that does not mean that the remaining 4 states do not ratify. However, it is important to recognize that all 13 states, it would be very, very important for all 13 states to ratify the Constitution, if only because you do not want to establish a republic, you do not want to establish a new nation with a new Constitution without the support of all of its members. So while a minimum of 9 was needed, I think it's important to realize here that all 13 states would really be wanted to show that this was truly a united group of states and not a fractured group of states with only 9 supporting the new Constitution and 4 opposing. The ratification process, it required approval from, as we said, from 9 of the 13 states. Ratification debates were intense and widespread, and some states are going to demand a Bill of Rights, and a lot of the supporters for a Bill of Rights are going to come from the southern states. You had large stakeholders in Virginia that are going to demand a Bill of Rights as a trade-off, as a compromise to support the Constitution. Southern and other states are going to basically demand that a Bill of Rights be included, or a Bill of Rights be written to eliminate their concerns about the federal government having too much power and placing in writing, in simple English, the rights of residents, the rights of citizens of the United States, to make sure that those rights will be protected. If rights are written down, and this was recognized in 1788 as much as it's recognized now, rights are much, much, much easier to protect if they are written down and clearly understood. And the supporters of a Bill of Rights wanted to make sure that people's rights were written down so that they would not easily be violated. And that is where we're going to see the Anti-Federalists. That is going to be their big issue in terms of supporting the Constitution. They will not support the Constitution in ratifying it unless and until a Bill of Rights is included, and that will eventually occur. Bill of Rights will become the first 10 amendments to our Constitution. First 10 amendments to the Constitution, drafted to address anti-federalist concerns, and those first 10 amendments are ratified on December 15th, 1791. So the first 10 amendments, and there are only 27 amendments in our Constitution, 27 amendments since our Constitution was ratified. The first 10 were essentially added to the Constitution all at once on December 15th, and the first 10 amendments are those amendments that protect individual rights, and we'll be talking a lot about the Bill of Rights throughout the course of the school year, but just understand that the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments, were added to address the anti-federalist concerns, and they were ratified and added to the Constitution on December 15th, 1791. This is a good example of compromise, and actually compromise coming to pass, promises made in the political formation of our country, and promises being delivered. The Federalists who supported ratifying the Constitution basically told the Anti-Federalists, support the Constitution, ratify the Constitution, and then through the amendment process, which is spelled out in the Constitution. This is the beauty of this Constitution, our document. The Federalists said that we will add, using the amendment process in the very document that we want you to ratify, the Federalists were saying to the Anti-Federalists, using that amendment process, we will add the Bill of Rights to the Constitution as the first 10 amendments, and that promise was kept. The Federalists came through on their word, and the concerns of the Anti-Federalists were satisfied with the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. So 27 amendments in total, only 27, and 10 of them all at once means since 1791, there have only been 17 amendments to our Constitution for a total of 27. First state to ratify, we said Delaware, December 7th, known as the first state. They ratified unanimously. Small legislature, but still it was a unanimous vote. I believe it was 30-0 in the Delaware state legislature. Alexa, turn off my alarm. Excuse me. Alexa just had an alarm for me there. So Delaware, the first state, they ratified unanimously, and we'll see what happens after Delaware. New York, we'll see where New York falls into the equation here too, since we are New Yorkers. The ninth state to ratify, as we said, was New Hampshire. They ratified on June 21st, 1788. This provides the necessary ninth state for the Constitution to become effective, and it marked a turning point in the ratification process. In your textbook, I don't know whether it's going to be included in this PowerPoint, but in your textbook, there is a chart, there is like a diagram that shows the date and the order in which all 13 states will ratify. Both states, speaking of Virginia and New York, two of the major states at the time, both states had significant debates in their state legislatures. Virginia ratified 4 days after New Hampshire, so Virginia was the 10th state to ratify, and New York would become, I believe, the 11th state to ratify on July 26th of 1788. Again, in a relatively close vote in New York as well. So Virginia in June, New York in July. And again, even though New Hampshire is the ninth state, just understand it was important to get all 13 states on board, because you don't want to establish a republic with a new constitution with 4 of those 13 states not signing up and not being on board with the document. It would not be a good fit. It would not provide for the unanimity which you're going to want in a new republic. So very important that the additional 4 states will ratify. Final states to ratify: North Carolina will ratify on November 21st of 1789, November 21st of 1789. And Rhode Island was the last state to ratify on May 29th, 1790. So not a coincidence. Rhode Island was the state that did not attend the convention. They were also the last to ratify almost 3 years after the end of the Constitutional Convention. But by 1790, all 13 states were united under the U.S. Constitution, although it was law before the final 4 states ratified. Here's an image, again, from the Constitutional Convention. Final states to ratify: North Carolina and Rhode Island. Implementation of the Constitution. New government will begin operations on March 4th of 1789. So after New Hampshire becomes the 9th state, elections and the formation of the government will go into effect. So it will begin operations in the March following the ratification of New Hampshire. So March 4th of 1789, that will be Washington becoming United States president. That will mean that the first Congress, first members of the House of Representatives, and the first members of the United States Senate will be elected in 1788, and George Washington will be inaugurated as the first president on April 30th of 1789. First Congress will convene in New York City in that same year, 1789. Okay, let's look at a couple of probing questions. Why was the Bill of Rights important? Okay, why was the Bill of Rights important? Consider why the Bill of Rights was necessary. Who wanted it and why did they want it? Just some questions here on what we learned today. How did the Bill of Rights address anti-federalist concerns? And what rights does the Bill of Rights protect? What specific rights does the Bill of Rights protect? Again, each of these bullet points are things that we'll be talking about throughout the course of the rest of the week and actually for the entire year. But consider why the Bill of Rights was necessary. How does the Bill of Rights address the concerns of the opponents of the Constitution, and what rights does the Bill of Rights protect? What were the key arguments of the Anti-Federalists? What were the key arguments of the Anti-Federalists? Just some additional things to be thinking about here. We talked about the Federalists and why they felt it was important to write the Federalist Papers to generate support for the Constitution. What about the key arguments of the people who opposed it? What about the fears of a strong central government? What alternatives did the Anti-Federalists propose, if any? And how did their concerns shape the final Constitution? How did Anti-Federalist concerns shape the final Constitution? How did the Federalist Papers influence ratification? How did the Federalist Papers influence ratification? Again, all things that we've talked about in this video today. Analyze the impact of the Federalist Papers. Which arguments were most persuasive, and how did they address the concerns of the Anti-Federalists? So we're going to be looking, when I return to class later in the week, we'll be looking at some specific excerpts from the Federalist Papers. Be prepared to talk about how the Federalist Papers would influence ratification and what arguments they made that were persuasive in doing that. What challenges does the new government face? Again, consider the immediate challenges after the Constitution is ratified. Consider the immediate challenges after the Constitution is ratified. How does the new government address those challenges? And what role did the Constitution play in resolving them? Each of these things are things that we'll talk about more this week. I'm going to stop the video now, and if there's time left in class for you today in the library, I'd like you to spend any remaining time that you have just kind of going over your reading for Chapter 6 on these topics, and you can also work on your inquisitive assignment, which is due for Friday. I'll have a similar lesson like this video lesson for you for Tuesday, September 24th class. Thanks, class, and we'll talk when I get back.